This is a video with Bardolf Paul, longtime Subud member originally from Canada, and he's been a helper in different jobs in Subud. He's currently living in Indonesia. Bardolf, would you like to start out just by saying how you found and came into Subud?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a bit of a long journey there, Rockman. But it starts in my childhood, like particularly in my teens, where I just felt there was something missing inside, and this kind of began a kind of a search, kind of a low level search for what that was. I was raised as a Christian, went to Sunday school and church and all that with my family, but I just felt there was something missing there. I didn't get the content, it wasn't very meaningful for me, and became basically an agnostic. And then, um, I think what started to be attracted to things, spiritual things, like particularly Native American um, things to do with particularly drugs, like peyote and like
Mhm.
that. Um, and yeah, I uh, I had a friend who was much more into it than I was, and one day he left a book at my house. This was when I was about 18 or so, and it was a book called In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky. So it's like the Gurdjieff thing.
Yeah.
And I just kind of randomly opened this book, and looked at passages in the book, and I thought, this is it. This is actually what I've been looking for, answers to these questions that I had. So
Yeah.
that was the beginning, So I kind of was an avid reader, read all these books to do with Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, um, and eventually read Bennett's book. I read a series of Bennett's books, but his book on Subud. And
Concerning.
so concerning Subud, yeah. So that's when I first became aware of Subud, because I think I was really interested in a disciplined path, like actually work on yourself. And, so the Gurdjieff thing, also the Sufis. I found out about the Sufis, so that was interesting to me. And um, and then I asked, there was a local. This was in Vancouver and Canada, and there was a local bookstore called Yoga Vedanta Bookstore, and I asked them if they knew anything about Subud. They said, "Oh yeah, they just meet one street over here." I said, "Okay, what do you think about them?" I said, "Well, for me, they're just like a bunch of holy rollers. Get it? I'm not interested in that at all." So 1 year went by, and I was really desperate. I really had this kind of need to do something. So I went and became an applicant and was open in Subud, Vancouver.
Right.
And but it was always sort of like a temporary thing for me. I thought I really want to get into Sufi discipline and kind of work on myself in a more structured, organized way. And yeah, after a few years, I realized, okay, um, this is it. I haven't had any success with finding other ways of kind of getting into spiritual development. So I kind of, yeah, accepted, that this was the thing for me. And yeah, we had a very good group in Vancouver, and I became a helper in that group, and it was a wonderful group of men. Learned a lot from them, and yeah, just a very dynamic group. There were about 100 members, and very active. Bought our own place, just very solid group of people. But that's the story of how I came into Subud.
When were you opened?
In 65, in May 65. Yeah, so a long time ago. It's nearly 60 years, is it?
Uh, Probably, yeah, 60 years, right?
Yeah.
This year.
A- And I've never wavered. Always been dedicated to it. Never felt any doubts about it. Well, the only doubt I ever felt was in the early years, like I forget what year it was when Bappa came to Vancouver, um, 69, maybe. I was chair, and I hate to say this, but we had this plane full of Americans arrive to join us, some of whom one was in deep crisis. I don't know if you attended that. Um, what was it, Weinberg, yeah? Yeah, he was in crisis, and he was walking around the group of people seated, listening to Baba. And finally he pounced on one of the members of the audience and said, "You don't belong in Subud," and was kind of violently attacking this guy who just happened to be like a black belt martial arts expert. And the guy just was very passive about this. And anyway, they managed to pull him off, and Bappa asked him to come up and sit beside him while he was giving the talk, which made him really happy. But I thought, what is this? Like all this crazy, because there were plenty of things going on in the hotel as well. The management was complaining. Um, so I had a sort of like a doubt then. That was the one moment when I had any kind of question about it. And later, I forget his name at the time, but he attacked another member outside of Lattingham, and there was a stair. It was like on a mezzanine. There was like a stairway down into the lobby of this hotel, and he basically kicked this guy all the way down the stairs into the lobby. Oh my God! They called the police, and um, anyway, he went back to L.A. I think the helpers managed to organize someone to take him back. But so yeah, that was like yeah, kind of a questioning moment for me. But I got over it. I got over it. Um,
So when you were opened, what did you feel in the opening?
I really felt this vibration really, really strong. In fact, I felt it before I was open. I was really kind of waiting and I just felt this incredibly strong vibration inside. And then a simple movement, which was just kind of leaning backwards. And it was powerful experience for me. And yeah, I mean, afterwards, I was just kind of in a daze. Yeah, it was really quite strong. So,
Have you had any kind of experiences related to Bapak or being around Bapak?
well, very little actually, because I was always a bit standoffish that way, and that visit he paid to Vancouver that I was talking about. I was the chair, so I was at the airport. Papa came when he arrived, and I remember going up to like sort of shake his hand and welcome him to Vancouver.
Mhm.
And the next thing I knew, I was back against the wall in the airport. Like I just completely got blown away somehow. And um, yeah, that was kind of like an interesting experience. Uh, don't know what that was about. Well, I can think about it now, but otherwise, I was kept fairly distant apart from his visits and talks, all of that. Like I was very attentive to and really appreciated. But I didn't have any of these grand experiences that some people have with
How about world congresses? Have you been to several of them?
just one more thing, experience with Buffa. I did have an interesting experience when I went to Sukamulia, to the mausoleum, the grave site where Buffa is in Indonesia, outside Jakarta. I was with a friend, not a Subud person. Um, and I was sitting there quietly beside, Bappa's burial place, and I just started crying, like uncontrollably crying. Um, and I don't know whether it was sadness or joy, like this, it just like it went on for like, I don't know, 15 minutes at least. Um, so that's the only other experience related to Bappa. Yeah.
Yeah, I had that similar kind of experience around
Hmm.
book. Um, how about your work life? Has Subud affected your work
Um,
and uh,
yeah, profoundly, profoundly. Yeah, I was from the very beginning really wanted to know what my talent was, what the right work was for me, and I kept on going to the helpers. It's before I was a helper and testing, like, and it was just like, just wait, just do anything, you know. Don't think about it, just wait. So, and actually that really worked for me because gradually I because I've always been involved in the arts and the visual arts and drawing and painting and creative, yeah, the whole sort of area of the arts has been my main interest, particularly at a young age. And yeah, I started to work in a they call a medical art department of faculty of medicine at the university in Vancouver. And it was a great group of people. They were all kind of into the arts. But at the same time, I was having children. I was married. I had a couple of young children. And that was the focus, was really on the family and raising the family and taking care of that. As apart from my involvement in Subud in the group. So that kind of led me into the enterprise arena, listening to Bapa's talks. I thought, this is really important. It's really something I need to get involved in somehow. And I thought perhaps, go into a restaurant business. So I went to Scotland where there was a restaurateur, Subud guy, Howard Denton. He had this farmhouse restaurant franchise. So I spent about a week or so there and came back. And then I was asked because at this time, a group of young people had created this enterprise called Dharma Productions. And they were doing like graphic design and audio visuals and photography and stuff like that. Uh, who was involved in that was, oh, there's a couple of Americans, draft judges that came up. That were part of that group. Anyway, they invited me to join that, and so I left the job that I had at the university doing the medical art, and became involved in this company as an employee. And then a year later, myself and another super member, Carsten Smith, who was a graphic designer, a very good one, bought into the company because one of the founders wanted to leave. So yeah, so Lewis Olds was one of the people that was involved with the company at that time. You'll know him well. And Simon Andrews. Yeah, they were both involved in this Dharma presentations. Anyway, that so then I was in this Subud enterprise, which was really my dream and just kind of grew and the company developed very well. And then one day, about, I don't know, 12, 13 years into my working life there, I felt needed to make a little change, that what I was doing wasn't complete. So I went and did testing. And so I went to the help and said I wanted to test about my work. And they suggested, okay, why don't you test, how is your work or your inner development, or the development of your jiwa? So I did that test, and it was so shocking to me. It's like I was in hell. I was like crucified. That just really, really terrible um, experience. So I was just like blown away, like what? Because I really liked the work, I really enjoyed the work. It was great. It was in the arts. Um, so then we tested, well, okay, what kind of work would be good for the inner? And we came up with forestry.
Amen.
So
What?
with
With forestry. Huh.
forestry, yeah. So I was familiar because actually a lot of our business had to do with forestry companies. As a young person, I belonged to like a forestry group of young people. And it's all around. Like you'll know how it is in Washington, Oregon. Forestry, particularly in those years, was big business. So I started to take correspondence courses, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Actually, I just trusted the testing. Just okay, I'll do it. And someone suggested that I should just take some correspondence courses, see if I really liked it. And I did. I loved it. It was great. So then I slowly went back, transitioned from out of the business into studying over a period of a couple of years. And in my last 2 years, because it was a 4-year program, I was full time at the university and very little time in the business. And while I was studying, I found out about this area of international forestry, which really interested me. It had to do with what they called social forestry, working with local people. And I had a job after graduating with the forestry consulting company. And they had a project that they'd been working with in India, a social forestry project. And that organization, which was a church group, it was actually a church group that was running this project. And I knew them because we'd done business with them in Dharma. So I was very familiar with these people. But I didn't want to go to India. Like I had this kind of like anti-guru attitude, like this, all this kind of crazy, mystical, spiritual, so-called spiritual stuff. Didn't interest me at all. And I kept on looking for other work. But finally, there was nothing. This was the only thing. And so I took the job and I went to India. And it was like perfect. It was like the perfect timing for me. Fresh out of university, kind of real greenhorn. And and at that time in India, there was this development taking place of a methodology to work with communities, a participatory methodology. So there was quite a well-known development practitioner from the UK. His name was Robert Chambers. He was there working with NGOs, and I was with an NGO. And it was one of the NGOs he was working with. They were developing this methodology. So I got exposed to that, and I found it interesting. I found it very compatible with my values, Subud, all the whole approach. Um, and then after 2 years, the job ended. I went back to Canada and looking for work again. This was in the middle of winter, so it was really depressing going from sunny, warm India to, and I really loved India. I wanted to stay there. So anyway, out of the blue, I got a call from a woman in the UK with a research organization that I had visited on my way to India. And she said, there's a job in Vietnam. Are you interested? Vietnam, it's kind of a war zone, like, zero knowledge about that. So Um, I said, okay. And so I'm going there tomorrow, and I'll send me your CV, and I will give it to them. And okay. So I did that, and nothing happened. And then, sometime later, I got a call from Sweden from a woman who was interviewing me about this position. And actually, it wasn't kind of an interview. It was sort of like a given. Like, so I just somehow got this job working for this Swedish company in Vietnam on forestry. So, and that was really the beginning of wonderful, wonderful learning uh, experience of working in this new way with communities. And the great thing about Vietnam at that time is they had no history of development. And they felt they were left behind. So they were eager to do anything, try anything. You could just do radically new things with no problem. And what this was kind of involving the community in decision making and all that. And it fitted in line with, the philosophy of Ho Chi Minh, which was his thing was to live with the people, work with the people, eat with the people, sleep. So this was very much like that. This
Mhm.
way of working with communities. So yeah, I never thought to use this method that I learned in India in the job that I was going to do in Vietnam. But then it just seemed to be the perfect thing. I tried it, I wanted to try it out. And um and it was great. It sort of took off. And this was the first time it had been applied in Vietnam. And then we had other agencies coming, wanting to learn how to do this. And yeah, it was really quite miraculous. So I spent, 13 years, 12 years in Vietnam, working in this forestry agriculture sector with communities in the ministry, working with the ministry and building what they called an extension organization. So that an organization that could, it's this interface between government and people. So working
Mm.
at that interface. And then, you know, I got this invitation from Rockman Connolly, who was the CEO of Kalimantan Gold, which was the Subud gold mining company in Indonesia, to come and work with them. And I thought, well, you know, there must be a good Indonesian person that can do this. And anyway, eventually I did go there. I took the job, and it was like heaven. It was just, yeah, working with Rockman. There was Rick Clapham and Unser Geiger, Subud guys. We did Latihan together. We tested on things. And there was just this beautiful working relationship. We all had shared vision about Papa wanted to see developing in Kalimantan. So it was like, the history of my work, it's been like just being pushed in these different directions I wasn't really looking for. It just
Yeah.
kind of came to me. So that's how I feel the Latihan worked for me, was to really give me that kind of guidance and open the doors, the right doors, and close the wrong doors. So I had no choice,
Yeah.
um, whatever it was. And so I'm still here, but I'm actually, this year, I'm going to be leaving this work and semi-retiring, just going to the board, not being in a day-to-day management position anymore.
So, how is your family situation and all of this going on?
Well, interestingly, in Vancouver, so when I decided to take this job in India, I assumed my wife would come with me, but she said no. I don't want to go. So
Mm.
that was kind of like a shock to me.
Yeah.
And because she was a film editor. She had thriving business, a very strong social network in Vancouver. And so I went, and it was difficult for me the first couple of months, and I went through interesting um, transition where I realized, what was the core, what was at the core, the heart of our relationship. Not all the kind of peripheral stuff that can be really nice. And that, I just felt connected, very much connected to her. And knowing that, knowing that it's very clear, there's no question that we were meant to be together on some level or another. And so I was kind of every year I would go back and spend a month or so there, and she would come and spend times with me in my wherever I was working. But yeah, she was really that was, and my kids were grown up, so they kind of said, "Why didn't you do this earlier, Dad? We would have loved to have, gone to these different countries and been there and experienced that." And so they did come visit. My son stayed with me quite a long time and really enjoyed when I was in Vietnam. Yeah, so the family was fine, basically, except my wife. I think she was the one that suffered,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Uh, but yeah, that's kind of the family thing. My wife was in Subud. She got open shortly after I did, and for about 5 years. Her motivation was because I got open. I don't think she would have done that on her own. And eventually she left. She wasn't really getting, well, I was such a fanatic in those early years. I think I was just too neglectful, didn't give her enough of what she needed. So she left, and she left Subud. She didn't leave me, but we continued to have a very loving relationship. And I think that kind of affected the kids, that because none of my children came into Subud, um, which I always find kind of intriguing. Like some families, everybody, all the kids, everybody kind of is a Subud member. But yeah, it didn't happen. I think that was mainly the reason why. I think if my wife had remained in Subud, the kids would have come.
So are you still together after all these years?
But she passed away in 2014, so over 10 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, we were very much together to the end. Yeah. I spent a year with her because she had quite severe cancer, terminal cancer. So the last year I spent 100% with her.
so since when did you start in Indonesia? When did you move there?
That was in 2003. Yeah, so that was 22 years ago.
Okay.
But I'd been coming, like, well, I went to the World Congress, the one in 71 you went to, um, and then when I was in Vietnam, actually when I was in India, I started to come to Indonesia when I started working abroad, when I was in Asia, because it was really convenient. But in Vietnam, I was an isolated member. Like there was nobody else. But that was a bit of a test in itself, like doing Latihan, you have to be very disciplined. And I started to do the last 10 days of Ramadan in Indonesia, in Wisma Subud, in Florida. And yeah, so that was kind of a refreshing time of the year for me to do that. And it gave me a familiarity with Indonesia that I wouldn't have had normally. So yeah, that's kind of my Indonesian connection that started, yeah, 12 years previously. And also, I was involved in Susila Dharma. International, to see the Dharma Canada, and then to see the Dharma International, and went to events in Indonesia to see the Dharma events. And one in Kalimantan I attended. My wife and
So,
I went to Kalimantan in 1990. So I was
okay.
intrigued, because Papa kept on talking about Kalimantan. What is this? So I went, and it was the early days. There was just the guest house, just been built on the river, nothing else. And I just couldn't figure it out. It's here. It was like not a very interesting looking place, a very flat landscape. And yeah, I just didn't get it. I didn't get it. I had a very small experience while there, which I just felt at some point, I felt the world turning. Some, it's the only way I can describe it. It's like sensation of the earth, not like an earthquake or anything, but the whole planet moving, turning. But that was like a kind of a few seconds. And otherwise, my Kalimantan experience was like zero until I came.
Hmm.
And then just powerful Latinx, like just really so strong. I couldn't figure it out. I thought like, hey, would location affect your Latinx? Why wouldn't it just be the same wherever you are? But yeah, obviously there's factors that enable you to surrender more deeply and receive more. But yeah, so that was a big selling point for me being here. It's just and there was a community. The Romansari community was there. So yeah, there was that sense of Subud community and sharing. And yeah, it was lovely. Still is. I think I feel blessed to be able to be here.
So in the various jobs that you had, do you feel that you actually made an impact on the people and in a positive way?
I believe so. I think also institutionally, I think probably even more importantly, like I was working, like in Vietnam, I was working in the Ministry of Forestry. It became agriculture and forestry after a while, but that introducing that approach, the way of working with communities became embedded in the institution itself and in the communities. So it was a very special time, Rockman, in Vietnam, because when I was there in 2000 and no, sorry, yeah, 1991, I went to Vietnam. So in 1991, they were just still recovering from the war, very poor country. And also it was very drab. There were no shops. There were no restaurants. Well, there were like one or two. There's no signage. Um, it was just really drab. Um, and then in would have been 1993, Bill Clinton lifted the embargo, came to Vietnam, lifted the embargo, and that just opened the doors for because they couldn't trade internationally. They could only trade within the communist law, and their main partner was the Soviet Union, not China. China was their enemy actually, historically. Um, so they lost the Soviet Union in '89. I think was when that fell apart. So they lost their main trading partner. And yeah, so they were struggling after that, just to keep the company running, or the country running. And then when the embargo was lifted, just and it just blossomed. I
Hmm.
mean, they're natural business people. They just
Yeah.
make money, like sort of like the Chinese, but in a kind of a softer way. They're very, very focused. So yeah, I got onto that. Uh,
Um, any other spiritual type experiences that
well,
you
yeah,
account?
Aussie. I mean, I've never really had from the Latihan these kinds of revelatory experiences that people have. It's always been sort of like fairly normal for me. And but for me, an important thing is that I embraced Islam um, about in around 2015, 2016, so nearly 10 years ago. And the story behind that is I always was interested in Islamic culture as a young person, like in my teens, and I don't know if you know Sir Richard Francis Burton, but he was this British explorer, and he did this translation of the Thousand and One Nights. And this was, I think I was 18. So I read this biography of this guy, and I went and I thought this would be interesting to see this translation that he did. So I went to like a secondhand bookstore and said, "Do you happen to have this translation of the film?" Said, "Oh yeah." It was like 19 volumes. Like it was this huge set. So I bought it. I took it home. I started reading. I read the whole thing, and in there, Islam is embedded. So there's this kind of repetitive stuff. When they mention the Prophet and peace be upon him. There's this kind of ritualistic stuff that goes on. And anyway, over the years, started happening in my Ladihan is I started to do the prayers. I started to go into the Muslim prayer positions in my Ladihan. And I was always intrigued because Baba said, practice your religion. Why? I mean, what's the point? We've got the Ladihan, why do we need to? And I don't even know what my religion is. I thought perhaps it was Christianity. So this thing started to come out. Of course, we all say Allah, 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 like, uh, and then finally I thought, well, I think I will become a Muslim. I think it sort of seems obvious that I should be, that that's my religion. And I felt I was born a Muslim. I didn't know it, but I was born a Muslim. So I'm very intrigued about the the relationship between religion and Subud, how that works. That's supposed to be. Great thing about Islam is there's this incredibly rich heritage of scholarship. And the language is the same as in Subud, with the nafs and, the lower forces, all this kind of stuff. It's the roh, this is all Islamic terminology um, for presumably real things. Just because they have an Islamic name doesn't mean they're only is for Islam. Um, so yeah, I started to, and YouTube, kind of came to the screen, and there's all these talks about Islam, from different people, different university scholars, which for me, like, I just love learning, really love learning. And, in Subud, you're not supposed to think about spiritual things or just do your Ladahan, do your work. So this gave me sort of like the entree into learning about stuff that I was really interested in that could never really explore in Subud. And and I continue. I mean, it's just been an enrichment of my life. And when I do the prayers, I try to bring the Latihan in. Before I do the prayer, I feel the Latihan and then start to move from the Latihan.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's for me, it's been really interesting, to discover that and to explore and see how that works. And the great thing, you know, living here, Rockman, is it's a religious country.
Yeah.
Everybody believes in God. You know, there's no embarrassment talking about God. Whereas, you know, and maybe more so in Canada than America, but it's just, you know, sort of like not something you bring up in public. You know, you don't talk openly about that kind of thing because it's a secular society.
Yeah.
And the values, you know, I just find the material values. I go back to Canada regularly. It's just like it's more and more heavier, like the material load on people is just really heavy. So it's quite a blessing being able to live here in this kind of environment with Subud as well as beyond Subud.
Yeah.
An understanding, you know, a lightness of being, you might say.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that being in this country is very harsh compared to,
Yeah,
places like Indonesia. It's
yeah,
much more of a feeling country rather than a materialistic thing.
yeah. A couple of years ago, I started to listen to Bapa's talks regularly. And I came to 1971. There was this, no, 77, 78. There was this huge world tour. I think there must have been 100. And started to listen to them all. I went through all those talks. And then moving closer, you know, 80, 81, again, there was another world tour. And I think this is really critical, you know, I think for us as Subud members to listen to or read or, you know, like pay attention to what Buffett was saying because he really, for me anyway, really helped my focus and understanding for the Lettingham, like what it means and the importance. Like he made this statement that the Lettingham is not just a thing you do on Monday and Thursday or whenever. It's the real Lettingham is what happens in your life with the application of the Lettingham in the way you live and what you do. So I'm not sure people realize that. You know, I mean, it, this is from 77, and he gave a talk in Vancouver, and just like it never touched me. I never really realized this, and yeah, so there are these kind of core messages that Papa repeats over and over that vary from what year it is. You know, like there's that year was when he introduced the, you know, Said Anwar and Said Anwas, you know, these two brothers. Um, so there are these kind of threads running through, but there's wonderful, wonderful stuff in this talk. Really so enriching. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't see it as dogmatic, you know, like it's just like really touches you. And,
No, his talks were alive,
yeah, yeah.
even ones from the late 50s are just as pertinent now as,
They're great. Yeah, they're really unique, those ones. Yeah. Then I'm into what is it now? 81 right now. German, very interesting talks in Germany, you know, where um talks about Kalimantan, you know, that this project that he's doing in Kalimantan, what he's planning on doing and why he's doing it. And he says, you know, after that happens, Subud will grow because then there will be this evidence. There will be this evidence that first in Indonesia, people will see what we in Subud can do and be attracted to Subud. But then for the whole, will be this example.
hmm,
So Yeah, I mean, that just kind of repeats that over and over again. We just really have to do things that, will attract people, will impress people. And, oh, these people do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I don't have any other questions, but if you have anything else you'd like to add, maybe how
Yeah,
Subud.
I just am very sympathetic with people living in the West, Europe, America, North America, particularly, um, the challenge we'll face, with in the States right now, there's new government that's coming in. I mean, that's going to be very interesting to
Yeah.
see the impact of that. Um, yeah, so I think you really got to be strong. You really have to somehow, and ideally, the groups to me are so important, that they can you can help one another in a group. And I experienced, like I was isolated for at least 5 years in Vietnam, and it was challenging. So strengthen the groups, and do enterprises, be diligent in your livelihood. Yeah. I, I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful that I came into Subud, and such a blessing for me.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity to say a few things, hopefully useful to people.
If I can find the thing that stops the
So,
recording. Oh, here we go.